So hello, everybody, and welcome to Morgan Bell's virtual book launch. We are in the season of the coronavirus, and everything has been canceled. It's been a very strange time, but Morgan's book is so good. Here it is, Idiomatic for the People, and she needs a book launch, and we're just going to do it remotely. So we're going for it. This is the first one.
Mine on my end.
Backwards books on both ends. This is the first time I've ever done a virtual book launch. I think it's probably Morgan's first time.
Definitely.
Bear with us. This is not going to be smooth and pro. It's going to be raw and real, but we're going to do it. Yeah. So what I thought I'd do is I'll introduce you, Morgan. I'll do a little bit of a bump about your book and how fabulous it is. And maybe you can read a couple of poems from the books, and I might even ask you a couple of questions. How does that sound?
Awesome. That sounds really good.
Okay, brilliant. So let's talk about Morgan. Morgan Bell is a Novocastrian, born and bred, and also an Australian writer of short stories, including the short story collection Sniggerless Boundulations, which was published in 2014, and Laissez-Faire, which was published in 2017. She's also a story contributor to local anthologies and community projects. And in 2014, she was shortlisted for the Hunter Writer Center's Travel Writing Prize for her anti-travel story, Don't Pay the Ferryman. In 2016, Morgan edited Sproutlings, a compendium of little fictions, which I'm very proud to say I was in. We did have a very fun in-person book launch for that back in the pre-coronavirus days. And a speculation fiction anthology, and that was for an Invisible Elephant Press. And she has since taught many creative writing workshops and is very well known for her fiction and editing. And so when Morgan first told me she'd written a poetry collection, I was very surprised. I had no idea she wrote poetry, though I'd been enjoying her fiction for many years. When she sent me an early version of the collection, I was floored. The work was extraordinary, fresh, visual, powerful, arresting. These are really fantastic concrete poems. They move across the page in ways that are artistic, and it's going to be hard to convey that to you through Morgan's readings. I will show you a little bit of that, but I think you really just need to get a hold of the book to see what I'm talking about.
Yes, definitely.
We'll finish up this by telling you how to do that as well. So these are poems that flow and swoop. Sometimes they resolve to a point, they fade out, they redact, they march boldly forward in textual arrows. Each poem tells a story that it's not just semantics, it's visceral. So even before you get into the meaning of the work, the actual visual of the poem holds you there, drawing into a collective story that covers things like trauma, grief, and recovery. Idiomatic for the People reminds me a little of other textual and visual poetry like Erica Baum's Dog Ear. There's a careful precision and almost a decontextualized multi-pathway play where words have meanings that they seem to work in and out of the subconscious. There's very multimedia elements of musical and they're intellectual. And I'm just going to see if I can show you an example because you really do need to see what I'm talking about. I know you can't see it, but maybe you can get the sense of it, of the way the words kind of flow down the page, with the way the text, for example, again, I know it's backwards on here, but the way the text changes font.
I love how everyone always opens it to the page with the swear word on it. That happens. It's like some kind of mystical thing where if you open the book to any page, it will be that page. Yeah.
Look, just so we can actually tag this as explicit, I will just read.
Yeah.
I'm not afraid of swear words. I have teenagers.
No, I think there's only like one or two in it, and everyone opens to that page, so it's great. Yeah.
$350, like Tony Abbott, the motherfucker. He can't surprise people. I just wanted to read that and say.
It's a quote from a real life person. But maybe I would say the same thing. I don't know.
Do you have a job? Do you have a job? Oh, sorry, I'm reading. I'm not asking you if you have a job, Morgan. I'm actually poem here, which actually, as you can see, again, I just want to try and give people who may be watching this a sense of how that text changes down the page and fades. And you can imagine as you're reading it, the kind of beginning with the yell, there's a kind of sonic quality to the way that text works. It starts with a yell and then it lightens as it goes down and almost fades into obscurity. The text shrinks. It not only gets paler, but it actually gets smaller, and a job changes to hug, changes to jbub, changes to biaoyab, changes to java hubu, and so on. So, if you're reading that in your head, it really has again, it creates a kind of meaning that is not just the language, but has a very visceral, very bodily sort of feel to it. I mean, here's another example. See this point coming down to a point. And there's lots of stuff. The whole book is like that. It's really unique in its concreteness. A little bit of Michael Farrell quality about it as well with some of the wording, but it is, I'm not going to compare it too much to anybody else because there's really nothing like it. It's totally unique. It's like Morgan Bell alone. And also, look at this little thing. I love small books. I have a thing for small books. They're not only inexpensive and cheap to post, which means that's kind of, I don't know, that kind of appeals to me democratically. It's easy to buy a cheap book, a small book, but also they literally do fit in your pocket. They can be carried around. And this one is just so beautiful. It has like almost a William Morrissey cover. It's got little rabbits on the back. As an object, and it's got this lovely quote from me on the back as well. But as as an object, it's a really, really nice thing. So again, I'm going to let you hear Morgan read from the book, but I'll just say that the book is structured into 5 sections. So there's fight, flight, freeze, and fawn. And which, for anybody who knows, these are, of course, the 4 F's of threat response. So that's the PTSD typology of survival, which Morgan handles with incredible subtlety, evoking voices that mirror corporate taxonomy, psycholinguistics, and code as well, computer code. So there's a real poetic subtext that kind of goes along with there. You have HTML code, and it was tempting to just try and see what that renders to, but I didn't do that.
Oh, I know. I think it would nearly work if the if the bit inside the code meant anything in computer language. But yeah, it's close.
So, sometimes the work is intensely personal and linear and progresses just like memoir. And one example of that is, for example, Too Quiet Loudly. And I'll just read a tiny bit. It was the day after I escaped being a lot of fun that I realized my clothes had gotten louder the more I faded away. Everyone knows Baby Spice doesn't sing and isn't really a baby. She's a sexy kitten in her terrible 20s, or she has to pretend to be. So that's, really powerful and very moving and very, I guess, very memoir-like and linear. But in some ways, that's a trick because the poetry often becomes slippery and breaks into dialogue in the same poem, in fact, that sounds almost like a primal call, something almost unconscious, responsive anger that's confronting, borrowing words from current affairs and overheard voices, coalescing into anagrams, acrostics, puzzles, ekphrastic stimulus. But then, just as it seems as though that confrontation becomes too intense, the work retreats, it redacts, it begins to develop a different kind of meaning in white space, this kind of almost I am not here, which is another line from the work. And the reader is forced to engage with this silence, almost visually, as the work fades into a place of deep and, in some ways, unspeakable vulnerability. Throughout the book, Nick Wieman, is that right? Wieman?
Yeah, I believe so. He's a Russian artist that I found online, so I haven't actually heard the pronunciation of his voice, but in my head I say Boomin.
So throughout the work, there are illustrations, what you call survival response rabbits. I love those little rabbits. They're throughout the whole book, along with your own exquisite typesetting, which is just really quite arresting. And all of that creates a sense of motion and almost a cartoony quality that not only lightens the mood of work that sometimes is pretty intense, but also reminds us that this is almost an Alice in Wonderland world. It's a kind of dream logic. It's real, hyper real, but not necessarily sentence real. It's more real than real. That kind of nightmarish dream logic, but it's also kind of blackly funny. There's wry humor throughout the work, repetitive rhythms, aphorisms, word plays, puns, and of course, as the title would indicate, idiomatic, idioms, which are everywhere. So, why bark if you have dogs? If you have dogs, why bite? A bite, dogs, I now pronounce you man and dog. So bite, oh chum pal. There's a constant nod throughout the book to modern culture, including television and kitsch references like Carrie Fisher, strangled by her own bra, Faye Grant from the sci-fi series V, and of course, as we just quoted, the incomparable, maybe that's the wrong word for it, Tony Abbott. Of course.
It's like, does he make the book a little bit dirty? Yeah.
I'm not sure if I can say him. Of course, the book's title itself is a tribute to REM's seminal album, Idiomatic for the People, which is also referenced in the poem Mine on the Moon, a play on the album's biggest hit, Man on the Moon. If you believe...
I love that you got that without me telling you in any way. You just, because you know your music so well, you're like, REM? I'm like, yes.
Yeah, that's my age as much as anything. If you believe... I'm not going to sing, but... They put a man... she's singing as she says she's not going to sing. I'm trying to stop.
Yeah, I'm not going to sing.
Don't sing.
I won't.
People don't want to hear you sing. Okay. E. Cummings is referenced in the notes. And although he's not referenced, I don't think, I can't help but think, as I always do when I come across work of this complexity, of Finnegan's Wake, in James Joyce's Finnegan's Wake, which I did study, in the lines, over Mott near Riven Rent, he earned her. That to me just makes me think immediately of Finnegan's Wake. So Idiomatic for the People is an exquisite collection. It's hugely ambitious for a first poetry collection. As I mentioned, with its William Morris style floral cover, its meticulous typesetting, and the deep blend of psychological, lyric, and postmodern presentation that I keep finding myself going back to and rereading, this book is a joy. So, whether or not we can meet in person and do this with an audience, or whether you're seeing this online, and that's the only place you can see it from the confines of your disease-free household, I am still going to take this opportunity to declare Idiomatic for the People officially launched. Congratulations, Morgan, on this exceptional work.
I'll be the audience.
Maybe at some point in the future to put on a claptrap.
Yes.
Crack right now.
Yeah. Not too much of the canned laughter, but
yeah.
a bit of applause.
So congratulations. Seriously, I'm not saying this just because, you're a fabulous person and I adore you as a friend, but this is really quite an extraordinary book. So well done you on creating this thing.
Thank you so much. And yes, I haven't, like, every poet I know submits poetry everywhere and has it published, and it's all beautiful. And because I'm like a little hermit in my bedroom, I was like, oh, this isn't really poetry. So I'll just make my little riddles and just be in my bedroom making weird stuff. But I had a great opportunity to swap mentorship with Magdalena. And we kind of exchanged drafts of projects we were working on. And I got a fabulous draft of a novel that had a bit of like a time travel aspect in it. And I love speculative fiction. So I went through that and looked at like the structure of that. And I said to Magdalena, well, since I've got a poet in front of me and a well-known poet, I might as well give you this poetry project, which I wasn't even really looking at. I was just doing in the background a bit. And I sent it to her and she was like, this is good. And I'm like, oh really? Maybe I should move this to the front of the file. So yeah, I was a little afraid of it being obviously it's idiom, so it's going to be a little cliche. So
It is so not cliche.
yeah, I know. Hopefully I've freshened them. Hopefully I've freshened them up a little bit. But yeah, I kind of thought, and also I'm not as well read in poetry. Like I'm not like an academic in literature. I haven't studied. I studied engineering at university,
Honestly,
so
that comes through, and that's part of, I think in many ways it's kind of part of what makes the work so fresh, because
yeah. So I was a little unsure as to what had already been done. I was trying to be like a bit of an autodidact and read as much as I could in poetry, and I spent a whole year beforehand just trying to absorb as much as I could, and a lot of local poets too, including Magdalena. But yeah, I'm kind of like, oh, is this the 59th time somebody's done this? Like, surely someone must have put something in a triangle before. And yeah, a lot of self-doubt about how original that it might have been. But yeah, it was such a great confidence boost having Magdalena as a mentor and someone that I know is so well read and just so helpful. And even on a few like line edits, I remember saying to her, like on a couple of them, like, this is formatted down to the 10th of a millimeter, so we can't move anything here. But this one, okay, you can move something in this one. So yeah, really helpful but delicate. I really appreciated your help, Magdalena. Yeah, and the fabulous blurb. Oh my God, I didn't even know you were going to do that, and then that was the perfect thing to put on the back. So
well, I'm
thank you.
part of it. So I know it's hard because again, a lot of the work in the book is very much visual. This is a lot of this is quite pagey, if you like, and needs
Yeah,
in its context, in its structure. But if you think you can, maybe pick a couple that you think would read well, and maybe just read us a bit. Can you do that?
yeah. Actually, because I faced this problem before, where I did a very small launch up here where I live at Port Stephens, and I had the book in front of me, and I'm like, I don't even know how to read this aloud. Like, it really is written to the page. So on something like Mine on the Moon, which I've got there, I actually wrote a reader's copy as well. So I might do that
Yeah, do
and
that.
read it as I intended it to sound rather than read all the brackets. So yeah, this is in the fawn section. It's the first poem. So fawn number 1, Mine on the Moon. And these, a few of these, there's 4 of them in here that are all anagrams of the word heteronormative, as in the opposite of queer. So yeah, it lends a really nice, strange, foreign sound to it when you're only using, you know, half of the letters of the alphabet. Here we go. Meet her there at the mine on the moon, her heart too eaten to remain on earth. There, to tame her naive air, he met her at the river arm. The torrent ran to him. The Ammonite entreat her to thieve an emotive term, mine. Heave to remove the iron in the ore, on the roam home have him mention her name. The time to hear her over in a moment. Moon over Mott near Riven Rent, he earned her. So yes, that's my way of reading a very strangely formatted poem.
So tell me a little about that poem. I mean, I know it's Man on the Moon, or it's sort of built around
Yeah,
the R.E.M. song Man on the Moon, which is built around Andy Kaufman, the comedian, and the film. that was made about that as well. Just talk to me about that poem and how it came about and your thoughts about the
Yeah, when I kind of started, I did the project as a whole. So I had like just a bunch of ideas that I kind of dumped down into a folder, and then I wanted to make it really parallel. So I wanted to make, you know, 4 sections, and then within the sections I've got um, like the rabbits at the beginning of each section, and there's 5 poems in each section, and they follow an order. So the first one is a anagram, because I love little word puzzles. And I'd actually read, this is typical me, I had actually read a like an open for submissions, like a call for submissions, from, oh, who was it from? Oh, I'm totally blanking on the name. It's a poetry press in Sydney, and they wrote part of it. They have this amazing page calling for, like, this is our style, and they're kind of quite a queer punk activist kind of thing, and they'd written about you know, we want commentary on our Australian hellscape, and it was just really appealing. And they'd used the word heteronormative in it, and as a queer person myself, and someone who especially in early years of uni, like, I had a lot of queer activist friends, so the word heteronormative, like, we just saying that all the time. And it's funny how you get later in life, like I'm nearly 40 now, and you lose a lot of that language when you're around people that it's not that meaningful to. And I got another, I got refreshed on how much I enjoy that word. So yeah, there's 4 poems in here that are anagrams of heteronormative, the idea being, you know, what's left out when everything is just heteronormative, and like as though the other letters are the queer letters, and, you know, if we filter them out of our writing, of our life, then of our society, then, you know, what are you left with? And some, like, that one's one of the more romantic kind of ones, but it still has more of a like a gender rolesy kind of simmering prelude to some domestic violence, kind of just that tension that comes with some of those more heteronormative relationships that can be toxic for both men and women. And then there's, you know, other ones in here that were part of the anagrams. I'm trying to actually put my finger on one.
I mean, that one to me.
Oh, the one that you mentioned before, I'm not here. That were like that is a literal. So the missing letters are there. They're just
hold that one up again.
Faded.
I do love that, the way that one looks. It's so unique. Yeah.
Which way am I going? This way.
Yeah, you get the idea from that.
Yeah, I get the idea. I've got some photos on. Oh, is that it? There you go. There's my skills at lining something up in front of a camera. So yeah, so they're not in that one. They're not missing. They're just faded, and you can see the effect of how choppy the words look when the queer letters are disappearing. So they're there, but they're just kind of faded and in the background. So yeah, I worked with it a few times, and probably the most like aggressive or violent one was the very first one, which is like the triangle one. So that was using all the more violent kind of language, and they're all words that, you know, they all have double meanings. Like, they can be nice words as well, but the sounds of them all mashed together.
I think you could read that one because it.
Yeah, I'll read some of that one. So yeah, this is the very first poem. It's in the fight section. So the little my little rabbits, oh, they're so cute, but they are kind of scary as well. So yeah, this is fight one, hammer it home. So once again with the anagrams. Hammer it home to him, never root an it or a homo man, never enter the rear, hone in on the meat mitten tit, renovate vain terror, have no honour in the naive mate, to taint, to tame, eat the rim, over hormone trim, have more non-men, ram the iron main vein, earn the invert he-rooter, one orientation, to retire home, rotten homo, no harm in tarnation, torment them here, orate the hate rhyme, reiteration time, revert to the overt even in their era, mention their intent to the otter, amen, hit the maven riven, tear at her throat, over an intimate motion, moan, venerate the mother, either me, meet me here, or arrive there. So yeah, just a way of taking basically from the same set of words, and I had lists, like I'd listed out like probably thousands of words and selected, kind of curated ones for each type of section. So there's one in the fight, flight, freeze and fawn. Just yeah.
And I guess you can't tell with the reading, but as those words get shorter and shorter and come down to that point, there is a real sense of tension of them being honed in and the choices being
yeah. But yeah, being very restricted, and there a lot of them are kind of near words, so they feel threatening even though there might not be a huge threat in there. Having all those sounds so close to each other, it does become like a soundscape, and that's some of the poems that I like the most are those E. Cummings soundscape ones, where it does make sense, but it's near nonsense. So, but what you're getting is just a feel, like you start feeling like something's dirty or weird or whatever it might be, just from the sound. So yeah, I find that really interesting.
Almost like music works in terms of creating meaning that is not necessarily verbal, but is actually sonic meaning.
But yeah, and at the same time, it was important for me to use real, like, English dictionary words and have them in a readable sentence structure, like rather than just putting a bunch of syllables down.
And there is that
to have them
to the book, you know, that is continually going back to this notion of you know, what you said about like being an outsider, about trauma, about, you know, finding, you know, where to fit in these structures, you know, where is the I in all of these poems. You know, sometimes it's redacted and sometimes it's there, but it's buried. You know, it's almost like that running puzzle that goes through it.
Yeah, and we're so much harnessed by the language we have to express ourselves. So we only get those, whatever, I want to say 800 pages of dictionary. It's probably more. That's what we get to say things. And the exact feeling that you might be experiencing, if it's not what the majority of people feel, it may not have been written before, like the word might not even exist. And I know that happens a lot with Indigenous people, that there's words in the Indigenous languages that we just don't have analogues for. in English. Like English is quite limited in a lot of ways. It's a big melting pot of a language, but some concepts we just don't capture the way other languages do. So yeah, it's a bit of an examination of that also.
Yeah, I mean, that's really interesting. And I'm not sure I'm qualified to talk about it, but I am very conscious of the fact that there is, in fact, a kind of, I don't want to use the word colonialism, but maybe that is the right word. There is a
Probably.
kind of oppression in a linear structure.
Yeah.
Maybe some of what you're trying to do in this book is to, use constraint to almost break that a little bit.
Yeah.
Or go beyond that, or find something, just a little bit outside of those constrictions, and taking and inverting things like, advertising language, which is all about getting us to feel something as an impetus to the sell or an impetus to buy. And that's creating a lack in us as an impetus to buy. But, poetry always, I think at its best, is always trying to subvert that or change that or open that out and saying, there's so much outside that.
Yeah.
So can I get you to read one more?
Yes. Should I do? Oh, maybe I'll do I'll do another one that I gave myself a little note of how to read it. So that's what it looks like on the page.
On the page.
And now I'll do my magic and somehow read that aloud. It's freeze, number 2, on the page. This only makes sense on the page. I only make sense on the page. I only exist. If only my existence made sense. I only exist on the page. This only exists in me. I make this only exist in me. I make sense only to me. My sense of myself only exists on the page. I only exist to make sense of this. The only extant, my only sentient, self only present, only.
Mm. And I love that you're reading that off the page.
I know.
It's just a fun play, isn't it? Because almost a different.
I have the perfect writer's moment for that, in particular, that one, of literally bouncing out of bed like that 5 seconds before you go to sleep, and it's like jumped up. I've got a little miniature whiteboard and I was like, write that down. Sometimes I do that and the next day I look and I go, what the hell did that mean? But yeah, that was the first 2 lines of that, I think. So thank you, Sleepy Days.
Well, it's a good technique, and that's a good tip for anyone looking for a way to capture that, those moments between waking and sleeping, because it really, again, something that poetry does, that can do, that prose can do too, but much more difficult and with much more difficulty.
Yeah.
Poetry kind of strives towards it, which is to, bridge that gap between internal and external, between waking and sleeping, between who we are in our roles in life, and all that other stuff that's going on underneath the surface of who we are.
Yeah.
Being able to just play with that and explore that and then bring it out in such a beautiful form is amazing. So again, I will say well done, and to finish this lovely virtual launch off, and thank you for being my guinea pig in the first one. This is great. I think it's doable. It's doable. But please tell everybody, how can they get a copy of this book? What's the best way?
It is available on Amazon. It's for sale on Amazon. It's also in the Girls on Key poetry portal, which if you're like a native to Newcastle or Australia, you might be familiar with that one. There's a lot of poetry books in there. I guess we could probably drop some links on the description or something, probably.
Yeah, I'm not sure. I'm going to put this up now, probably I'm thinking of a combination of places, but you know, I might start with YouTube, but I might even put it up as an audio on Compulsive Reader Talks. But once I get the recording,
Yeah,
I'll put it all over the place, and wherever I put it, I will add and show
yeah.
links to buy. So,
But yeah, definitely on Amazon. That's an easy one. And oh, it's in McLean's bookstore at the moment. They've been so lovely to the all the writers, like all the artists that lost gigs because of the coronavirus.
yeah,
They've actually made it would have been the festival bookstore where most like independent artists, that's where you make a bit of your income for the year. So they've actually moved it to being a virtual bookstore this year.
which is great.
So yeah, go on to McLean's bookstore, have a look, have a browse at everyone's work too. There's a lot of things that were going to be launched this year, like poetry books, anthologies, more of your indie work. Go and have a browse on there. I recommend it. So they've everything they were going to have in person, I believe, is going to be on the virtual bookstore,
Right.
which is marvelous.
That too, because you know,
If other people are like if other people are like me and they kind of put in a special order from their publisher or printer for the festival, you might have already put it in, which is what I did, and then it's not a big deal, like you're a little bit out of pocket because things get taken on consignment or you provide them at the venue yourself. So I think a lot of artists are in that bucket. So yeah, McLean's have a little pile of mine. I've got a little pile of mine at home because this one that Magdalena and I are doing now, this is going to be held at the Press bookstore. So yeah, I've got a little personal pile if anyone knows it and you want to send a message on Facebook. But yeah,
and
there's at least 4 places that you can get it.
absolutely, and do support local authors, venues, independents. Everybody needs support right now. So it's a great time as well. You know, like if you're a reader, and I know you're a reader, and I'm certainly a reader, isolation's kind of not such a bad thing.
Yeah, what we do.
I've got plenty to do. I've got my stack.
Yeah.
So,
Yeah.
Great time to read.
We can cope with self-isolation, but usually the festival's our one gig where we get out of the house and
I know, absolutely.
Swap works with people. So
Yeah, so get books.
yeah.
Books can be sent, and it's a great time for that. So brilliant. I will include all that in the show notes. And Morgan, thank you so much. It's been great to talk to you, and I'm glad we were able to still do this.
I know, this is brilliant. Thank you so much for suggesting this. I think I said to you at the time, I know everyone would have the same feeling that it's like, I'm a bit gutted, like the festival's not on, like it's completely understandable, and I completely support everyone staying in their homes to protect our vulnerable citizens. And I'm very grateful that everyone's doing that. But unfortunately, on a personal level, it's like, that's my thing that I do, that I love. So I think a lot of people probably feel like that. And it's great that you've been able to replicate it here. So part of the excitement's just talking to you, and I get to do that. So I don't feel like I've lost out on so much.
Brilliant. I mean, I don't get 100 photos, but I wouldn't have anyway.
I'm often Magdalena's photographer, and I may go a little bit crazy because I try to capture her smile, and I take a lot of photos.
Yeah. So yeah, multi-talented. Thank you so much. Bye for now.
Goodbye.